Governor Huntsman, you've touted your job-creating abilities as Utah's chief executive, but let's talk about your time in the private sector. You said that you helped create thousands of jobs as vice chairman of the board of the Huntsman Corporation. But of the 12,000 workers employed by the company, almost 10,000 were hired in China and India and other places outside the U.S. Isn't it accurate to say that as far as your time in the private sector, you've got more experience creating jobs overseas?
I'm very proud of my experience in the private sector. Huntsman Corporation is a terrific company. It's a wonderful example of a family entrepreneurial success story. Created jobs, to be sure, left communities a whole lot better than they found them, created a wonderful Huntsman Cancer Institute. But let me tell you the real problem that we're up against. If you want to build a facility in the United States, you can't, because of the EPA's regulatory reign of terror. If we want to strengthen our core in this country, which we must do, the percentage of our GDP that is from manufacturing is down to 10 or 11%. When I was born, it was 25%. It used to mean something when you read Made in America. We don't make things anymore in this country. We need to start making things in this country, and in order to do that, we need serious regulatory reform, not just repealing Obamacare, but ending the EPA's regulatory reign of terror. We need to create a more competitive environment that speaks to real tax reform that allows our entrepreneurs and businesses to step up and get it done and expand our economic base and create jobs. I'm very grateful for what Huntsman Corporation has done. It's a global company. The chemical industry is a global industry, and you've got to supply customers overseas. But let's fix our core in this nation. Let's get back on our feet. People are hurting, they're scared, and they're concerned.
Thank you. Congresswoman Bachmann, turning to you, you voted against the debt ceiling increase deal, and you voted against the Republicans' cut, cap, and balance bill. You insisted the country was not at risk of default. If you had your way, the debt ceiling would not have been raised. What do you say to analysts who insist that Americans' investments, their 401ks, their college funds, would have been far worse off today?
It was very important that we not raise the debt ceiling, because consider what happened. The Congress gave Barack Obama a blank check for $2.4 trillion. What did the American people get in return? $21 billion in illusory cuts. So from the time I've been in Congress, we've gone from $8.67 trillion in debt to now almost double to $16.7. This is madness. I've been all across Iowa. People are almost unanimous. Do not raise the debt ceiling. That was the right thing to do. The worst thing that you can do is continue to borrow money and spend money that we don't have.
So I'm sorry, what do you say to the analysts who say that the markets would have fallen through the basement?
I think the analysts, we just heard from Standard & Poor's. When they dropped our credit rating, what they said is, we don't have an ability to repay our debt. That's what the final word was from them. I was proved right in my position. We should not have raised the debt ceiling, and instead we should have cut government spending, which was not done, and then we needed to get our spending priorities in order.
Mr. Kane, do you agree with that?
I did not agree with raising the debt ceiling, because the solution that they came up with does not solve the problem, as Representative Bachmann talks about. The way to deal with it is to pay those things that need to be paid, and then make the tough choices of cutting the other things agency by agency, program by program, based upon performance metrics. We didn't need to raise the debt ceiling, but there was an easy way out, and the problem still has not been solved, and Standard & Poor's has sent a message.
Mr. Kane, I've got another question for you. You say that we can boost job creation by eliminating the tax on companies that bring back overseas profits to the U.S. But when we tried a tax break like this in 2004, companies didn't create jobs, they just paid bigger dividends to their shareholders. Why would it work this time?
It'll work this time for a number of reasons, because I think you're only looking at a small piece of it. Remember, it's a combination of things that I indicated. If you just pick out one thing and try just to do that, no, that's not comprehensive. When I talked about lowering the top corporate and personal tax rate to 25%, also taking capital gains tax rate to 0, as well as suspending taxes on repatriated profits, and here's the big one, make them permanent. Uncertainty is what's killing this company. Now, if a company were to decide that they want to take some of that money and pay a bigger dividend, so what? It's their money. The people receiving the dividend might be happy with that. Maybe that is the right thing to do. So I'm not concerned. I am not concerned about what they will do with that money if it is allowed to come back. I'm more concerned, bring it back so they'll have an incentive to make some growth decisions. I don't know one company that sits around the boardroom and talk about how we're going to stand still. It's about growth. And that's what I'm about, growth in jobs and the economy.
Thank you. Speaker Gingrich, you say that the unemployment problem in America has been made worse by the policies of the Federal Reserve. You call for auditing the Fed and stripping it of its banking powers. But Congressman Paul thinks the Fed needs to be abolished to create lasting prosperity. Why is the Fed worth saving?
Well, I think that having some kind of central bank is, in fact, an important part of how you deal with monetary policy in the modern world. But I would say to you that having Chairman Bernanke deal with hundreds of billions of dollars, and some estimates are as much as $16 trillion, in secret, is profoundly against a free society. The Fed should be totally audited. It should be out in public. Their decision documents from 08, 07, and 08, and 09 should be public. We should know who they bailed out and why they bailed them out and who they didn't bail out. And I think that it is a scandal that the Federal Reserve is secret. And I think that, frankly, their monetary policy since the late 90s has been a major factor in the bubble that has been created and a major factor in the economic pain we're now going through. So the Fed is certainly, going back as Reagan did to sound money, is certainly a key part of how you get back to prosperity. And the Fed is the primary villain in failing to have a sound money policy.
Congressman Paul? If I could follow up with you. Is Speaker Gingrich wrong to want to save the Fed?
Not exactly, because my position isn't that I'd close the door down immediately. You can phase it out. But there's some other things that we could do that in a transition phase. For instance, and I'm delighted that mainstream is catching up with us these days for auditing the Fed. This is great. But I've made a suggestion, which is a serious suggestion, and there's been quite a few who have supported me on this. We owe the Fed $1.6 trillion in Treasury bills. Where'd they get the money to buy it? They create it out of thin air. So we pay them interest. So that's on our books. So we literally, with legislation, could wipe $1.6 trillion off. That's not a solution to the monetary problem or our spending problems, but it would give you a year to work this out, and we wouldn't have had any of that debate going on. Those were all scare tactics to try to scare people into doing things. So, but that is one thing that we could do. But eventually, we have to deal with the Fed, because the Fed creates the business cycle. If you don't understand the business cycle, you don't know why we have recessions. The sooner we learn that, the better.
Thank you. Senator Santorum, I've got one for you. You said that you were, quote, the Tea Party before there was a Tea Party. But a top Tea Party goal, particularly in Iowa, is to revert back to the gold standard, something you oppose. How do you consider yourself in line with the Tea Party without agreeing on this major issue?
Well, first off, I didn't say that. The Washington Post said it. I simply commented what they said. I don't take the claim. The Tea Party organization is flat, and it should stay that way. It should support ideas, not candidates, and people who stand up and say they lead it. Well, I think most of the Tea Party people think their leadership is among the people, not between anybody as a member of Congress or anywhere else. What I've said is that I agree with Newt. I think there's some reforms that we can do with the Fed, and I agree. We need to audit the Fed. I disagree with most of what Ron Paul said. Just because he's mostly wrong doesn't mean he's always wrong. And so I appreciate his contribution in that regard. I want to talk about, because I didn't get a chance to comment on this debt ceiling. But Congressman Paul and Congressman Boxer are both in the Congress, and they had an opportunity to lead. They're asking you to have them lead this country, and they couldn't lead the Congress to do something responsible in making sure that we didn't have the fiasco that we have in place right now. We should have balanced the budget. The balanced budget amendment should have been the focus from the beginning. To suggest that we never need to raise the debt ceiling, that is, again, showmanship, not leadership. Of course we have to raise the debt ceiling at some point. We're borrowing 42 cents of every dollar. 42 cents of every dollar. You're going to cut 42 cents of every dollar? Just to remind you, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, defense, and interest on the debt is 60%. That means cut everything else and something of those. That's showmanship, not leadership.
When we come back, some closing remarks from the candidates and maybe a wild card or two. We'll see. Stay tuned.